At the Steamworks weapons factory, 150 New York State militiamen who were still loyal to the federal government confronted the citizens. It seemed the loyalists would not fire on their own people, but they did, grape shot from artillery, 6 rounds. The street was littered with dead and dying. The police supported the loyal militia by attacking the steamworks from a different direction. They charged forward, but they were trapped in a hail of bullets and bricks from snipers on the rooftops. The police poured into these buildings. They rushed to the roofs. In hand-to-hand fighting, both sides were hurled to the street below. The citizen militia retreated from the steamworks, regrouped, and attacked again. The loyalists and the police gave ground. The citizens took the factory, and it became their headquarters. Later, the police with loyalist reinforcements once again rushed forward, gained a foothold on the first floor, and in room to room, floor to floor combat, slowly took back the steamworks. There were many shipyards along the East and Hudson rivers, most of them engaged in the building of military vessels for the Navy. The New Yorkers attacked Webb and Allen, one of the biggest, where the Dundenberg, an ironclad ram, was near completion. The 7th New York Regiment defended the facility. The concentrated fire drove the citizen militia back. Simultaneously, a column of citizens attempted to seize the ferry terminal at Fulton Street, to deny this landing site to Union reinforcements. It was already defended by federal troops. Here the citizens were also beaten off. Police headquarters at Mulberry Street was still under siege. Thomas Acton, head of the Metropolitan Board of Commissioners, ordered all police reserves to relieve the blockade, along with a company of Zouaves. Quote, "Then the howitzer battery was ready, but a mob could learn. On the order to fire, the mob flung themselves flat on the pavement or scattered into doorways on both sides of the street. In the interval between rounds of canisters, screaming harmlessly down First Avenue, an answering rattle of musketry began to grow from windows and rooftops. These sharpshooters concentrated their fire on the officers. The troops were trapped, and because they did not have the training to fight their way out or clear the buildings, they died. The mob routed the Zouaves. The mob captured the artillery and turned it on the troops." Unquote. Then 2 companies of police struck the citizen army in the rear at 4th Street and Broadway. In more hand-to-hand fighting, they surged back and forth. The New Yorkers were routed, retreating up Broadway, which, quote, "looked like a battlefield thickly strewn with prostrate forms," unquote. On the 3rd day, the 47th New York Regiment reached the battle from Gettysburg. Edwin Stanton informed Mayor Updike that, quote, 5 regiments are under orders to return to New York, unquote. Then Stanton telegraphed that 11 New York regiments have been relieved and will be forwarded to New York as fast as transportation can be furnished, unquote. Stanton had chosen New Yorkers to kill New Yorkers. At noon of the 3rd day, after having been driven back from Webb and Allen, the citizen militia retreated until they reached the barricades of cobblestones along 9th Avenue. Then the police and the Union Army combined to dislodge them. Connecticut troops poured on a withering fire, which allowed the police to overwhelm the defenders. Governor Seymour came into the city, and he found that he had not only to deal with his efforts to force the Union Army to withdraw, but also with the Republican leaders. They were intent on inciting the New Yorkers to greater lawlessness. This would force General Wool, who commanded the Department of the East, to declare martial law. That would end Democratic Party rule. and civil government in New York. It would be replaced by military justice administered through the Republican administration. Martial law would depose Horatio Seymour and would require a military governor to control all future elections. When General Wool refused to declare martial law, the Tribune called him an imbecile. Wool was immediately replaced by General Dix, who was more compliant, but the battle ended before he could initiate such an extreme measure. As the tide turned and the federal forces pushed the citizen militia back, Governor Seymour, with a cavalry escort, entered City Hall Park. It was filled with infantry. Seymour spoke to the New Yorkers, asking them to stop fighting. He realized that the battle was lost, and to continue meant needless slaughter and a permanent federal control of the state. Quote, "My friends, I come from a kind regard for the welfare of those who, under the influence of excitement and supposed wrong, are in danger of not only inflicting serious blows to the good order of society, but to their own interests. I beg of you to listen to me as your friend and friend of your families," unquote. Seymour told the citizens that he had sent his personal aide to Washington to stop the draft. The New Yorkers threw down their weapons and dissipated into the wreckage of the city. After 4 days, the battle was over. Union troops remained in control of the city. More soldiers were brought in as part of a continuing army of occupation. Secretary of War Stanton sent this telegram to General Dix, quote, "We are sending you 10,000 infantry and 3 batteries of artillery. These are picked troops, including the regulars. If you need cavalry, we can perhaps send you 500, unquote. This tremendous battle did not make Lincoln more willing to compromise on conscription. He announced that the draft would continue immediately under General Dix, who provoked another confrontation with Horatio Seymour. Dix telegraphed the governor that since the enrollment, quote, "will probably be resumed in this city at an early date, I'm desirous of knowing whether the military power of the state may be relied upon to enforce the execution of the law in case of forcible resistance to it, so that I need not ask the War Department to put at my disposal for that purpose troops in the service of the United States," unquote. Seymour wrote back that he had appealed to Lincoln not to resume conscription until the constitutionality could be tested. Lincoln refused to postpone it. August 14th was the day the draft resumed. Dix requested more federal troops. Seymour again refused to comply, warning that enforcement would, quote, "excite popular resistance," unquote, and clarifying that New York State authorities would not carry out this national law. Conscription proceeded under the bayonets of this large Union Army presence. In conclusion, quote, "It has never been known how many perished in those awful days. According to the lowest estimates, some 1,200 of the rioters must have been killed, and 5 to 6 times that number wounded. But they hid their losses as far as possible and disposed of their dead in silence and darkness," unquote. This means that the citizen militia suffered about 8,400 casualties. And as a standard rule, an attacking army takes 3 times as many killed and wounded as the defenders. Then the Union Army and the police had losses of about 25,000. The combined total of 33,000 is higher than the great slaughter at Antietam and close to those at Gettysburg. This battle radically altered the political climate of New York. Its constitution was shredded, and the long-term consequences continued to be felt into the 21st century. Since Abraham Lincoln viewed New York as another Confederate state that had to be taught a lesson through Reconstruction. To achieve this, its elections had to be manipulated through terror, as was the voting in the occupied southern states. So, New York was invaded a second time by land, with a huge amphibious assault waiting on the New Jersey waterfront to be launched in case more force was necessary. This was in 1864, during the presidential election. With the polls controlled by the Army, a Republican victory was assured. Horatio Seymour was deposed, Lincoln was reelected, but all that, dear listener, is the subject of another story on another day. Thank you.